So with the major 26 update coming to macOS and iPadOS right around the corner, and with the iPad getting all these Mac-like features, it's actually made it a lot more confusing for the average consumer on deciding which computer to get if they could only pick one. Do you go with the iPad that gets you 95% of the Mac-like experience but gives you all the versatility of being a tablet and being able to use the Magic Keyboard and the Apple Pencil? Or do you go with the MacBook Pro that's more tried and true, it's been proven, and it's a lot more familiar to most people? That's what we're going to decide in this video. We're going to be comparing, of course, the internal specs of the iPad Pro to the MacBook Pro, comparing the hardware, but most importantly comparing the software in all the different use cases and to see who should get what in what situations and what use cases overall. So without further ado, let's decide. Should you get an iPad Pro with iPadOS or a MacBook Pro with macOS? Let's talk about it. But now, before we continue, if you enjoy comparison videos like this one, definitely consider subscribing to the channel because we have a lot more coming down the pipeline, especially with the Apple event coming in early September, comparing all the different operating systems and their corresponding hardware. So definitely get subscribed. But now, let's get into the first piece, which is going to be comparing the internal specs and deciding why we're comparing a MacBook Pro to an iPad Pro and not to something like a MacBook Air. Let's get into it. So to quickly contextualize why I'm comparing the iPad Pro to the M4 MacBook Pro and not some other computer, it has to do with three different things. First is going to be the hardware, both internally and externally. So you do get very premium hardware, the displays are amazing, you get pro level displays. Also internally you have the same chip, and then of course lastly it has to do with the price point. They're a lot more competitive with each other and they're both pretty well on sale right now and easier to get on Amazon, but we'll talk about that price point stuff at the very end of the video. But let's start off with some Geekbench scores, right? Because you're comparing the M4 iPad Pro to the M4 MacBook Pro. So internally, they have the same exact chip. And again, I know that the baseline level models have different internals in terms of RAM and storage, but we'll get to that at the end. We compare opportunity costs and things like that. But from a Geekbench score perspective, you're getting about a 3700 score on single core processing speeds on both of these devices. Again, I know use cases are a little bit different, but from sheer raw power, they're going to be identical because they're the same exact chip. You get roughly the same multi-core score of around 13,500 up to 14,500 depending on your environment and how cold things are and how warm things are. And then you do get a GPU score of anywhere between 50,000 to 60,000 depending on the conditions on both of these devices. So internally, the chips can handle pretty much the same thing. Now, of course, when it comes to the RAM situation, the iPad Pro comes with 8 gigs of RAM standard, and the MacBook Pro comes with 16 gigs of RAM standard. So we'll touch on that at the end when we talk about pricing. You can upgrade the iPad Pro to 16 gigs of RAM, which is what I have on my M4 iPad Pro, but it requires you to spend a lot more money on storage. They only let you have it when you have a 1 terabyte storage model, so that is something to take into consideration if you do value all that RAM. And then from an internal storage standpoint, the baseline model of the MacBook Pro comes with 512 versus the baseline model of the iPad Pro comes with 256. So again, you get twice as much storage on the MacBook Pro, but I just wanted to kind of put that there to compare apples to apples, but everything else internally is exactly the same power, same Geekbench scores, same transfer speeds with data, the way that it's all handled, same Thunderbolt ports and all things. So from a purely power standpoint, you're getting the same sheer and raw power from both of these devices. Okay, so now let's get into the external hardware and form factor, starting with the iPad Pro. In this comparison, I'm going to assume you're going to buy at least the Magic Keyboard, possibly the Apple Pencil Pro, but again, we'll get to that towards the end. But just to compare apples to apples, let's assume you have the Magic Keyboard as well. The 13-inch iPad Pro is a tablet first and foremost, so it is an ultra-thin form factor. It's only 5.1 millimeters in thickness. In terms of I/O, you do get the one Thunderbolt USB-C port, which is as fast as you need it to be when it comes to transfer speeds. Like I use that all the time, currently using it on my iPad Pro to connect my camera as a viewfinder to my iPad Pro, which is great to see. But then you also get that beautiful tandem OLED Ultra Retina XDR display, which is second to none. That is why I wanted to compare these two, because you get the mini LED on the MacBook Pro and the beautiful tandem OLED on the iPad Pro. So display alone on the iPad Pro is amazing, it's magnificent. You definitely have to kind of like see it to believe it in terms of how good it is from an overall quality standpoint. You also get that 120 Hz ProMotion on the iPad Pro. And then from a display standpoint on the MacBook Pro, you also get the 120 Hz ProMotion. You get a Liquid Retina XDR Mini LED, which is good to know. So it's still plenty bright, it's still pretty crispy, and it's still a great high quality display. But I will give the quality to the iPad Pro just by a little bit, not by much, but overall it's a great display also, and that's why it's in the MacBook Pro and not on the MacBook Air. And then again, to go back to the I/O, you get the one Thunderbolt port on the iPad Pro, and then you do get a second USB-C port if you have the Magic Keyboard in the hinge, but that's purely only to charge, and I believe it charges up to 24 watts of power, which is something to take note of. Then the MacBook Pro has a ton more of I/O. You get two full Thunderbolt 4 ports, you get an HDMI port, an SD card slot, you get MagSafe for charging, so you can free up those two Thunderbolt ports if you want to. Those Thunderbolt ports can also be used, of course, to charge the device, and then you also get a 3.5mm headphone jack. So if you care more about plugging things in and having a bunch of external stuff attached to it, the MacBook Pro is probably going to be your route. But again, you can still buy some dongles and USB-C hubs and Thunderbolt hubs if you do need to input more I/O onto your iPad Pro. Battery life is also, even though the iPad Pro is great for battery life for what it is, it's a super thin tablet, you'll get maybe 8 to 12 hours of battery life depending on how you use it. Versus the MacBook Pro, you will be getting much more, anywhere from 16 to 20, depending on how you use it. Even if you're really pushing the MacBook Pro, you're going to get a good solid 12 to 14 hours. Versus on the iPad Pro, if you're really pushing it, you're getting 5 to 6 hours. Again, it's a smaller battery, smaller form factor. They're able to fit more into the actual MacBook Pro, so battery is going to go to the MacBook Pro. And while you do get everything all in one on the MacBook Pro from a hardware standpoint, because again, it is a laptop, so you get your display, you get the computer, the keyboard, the trackpad, everything is built into it. You spend your $12.99 on Amazon to get this thing, and then you'll be able to use it how you want to. Versus on the iPad Pro, you get the Magic Keyboard, and then to get the Apple Pencil, it's going to be another $100 to $130, depending on where you get it from. So it starts to add up a little bit, but you do get that versatility. Again, iPadOS 26, we'll touch on the software here in a little bit, but it does make it feel like it can be a computer with the Magic Keyboard attached to it, but then you pop it off the Magic Keyboard. It's a tablet, it's a digital note-taking device. You can use it as a throw-around tablet to surf the web, to read books, to use it as a secondary display for your MacBook if you want to. So again, you can use it for tablet-related things, you can use it for content consumption-related things, or you can use it as a workhorse, as a typing machine, as a word processing machine. So again, you're really paying for the versatility of the iPad Pro because you are able to use it as a tablet, because that's what it's meant to be used for first, but it just also happens to now be able to handle a lot of the things that macOS handles from a multitasking and file management perspective. Which is going to be a great segue into what is better now that we have iPadOS 26 coming around the corner versus macOS 26 coming around the corner. Okay, so now let's kind of compare macOS to something like iPadOS. iPadOS 26 has completely changed what it's going to be like to experience the iPad, because it does feel a lot more Mac-like, right? You get the new windowing system, which is way closer to macOS than it's ever been. You get your 3 traffic light stops to manage those windows, like being able to X out of them, minimize them, enlarge them if you need to. You get tiling modes, right? You get side-by-side split view, you get the triple split view, you get the quad box mode, so you're able to have multiple applications running at the same time. You can have up to 12 floating windows overlapping each other on one iPad screen, which is great to see. The dock itself can now fit up almost an infinite number of apps. You can fit up to 29 applications on the dock. I don't know what the limit is on macOS, so somebody fact check me down below or leave a comment down below of what you know the limit to be. But I remember that was a big situation with iPadOS 18. You can only fit, I believe, up to 16 to 18 applications on the dock, versus on Mac, you can pretty much fit as many as you want to. But now we're getting closer on the iPadOS side, so at least it looks a lot more like macOS. You also get the improved files application where you're able to manage your files a lot better. You can pin files to your dock. Similar to macOS, you're able to then organize the columns how you want to, resize them, add different column values. You can add different tags in terms of color tags. You can customize the folders as well, turn them different colors, add emojis. So just a file management system and the windowing system, that alone has transformed iPadOS completely in how you use it. And what's nice about this is that, of course, we are talking about the iPad Pro, but it's not limited to the iPad Pro. iPadOS will have the windowing system on even the cheapest entry-level iPad and older generations of that cheapest level entry-level iPad. So I'll leave a video down below where I talk about all the different supported iPads for iPadOS 26 if you don't want to spend, the $1,000+ on an iPad Pro but still get most of the iPadOS experience. But now the question is it Mac-like enough to completely replace all the use cases of macOS? It's not going to replace all the use cases, right? Things are still going to work differently on macOS when it comes to iPadOS. Sure, you have way more applications to choose from because you have a whole app store with iPadOS, but things on Mac have been there for 50 years now at this point. People have been developing for that desktop class operating system for years now, so things are a lot more mature. So when it comes to pro-level applications, some people are saying that macOS is going to be the way to go, right? Because you have Final Cut Pro, you have Logic, you have Xcode, you have the whole Adobe Suite, and yes, there are some counterparts on iPad and the App Store and iPadOS, but they aren't going to be one-to-one, and most of the time they are watered down. For example, I don't use Photoshop on my iPad because it's not nearly as good as Photoshop on Mac. I use something called Affinity Photo 2, which is essentially just Photoshop for the iPad. Same thing with Final Cut Pro. There is a Final Cut Pro app on the iPad, but it is terrible. It is very bad. I can't use it. I've tried to use it. And if you compare that to Final Cut Pro on the Mac, it's way better and you have way more plugins and it's just a way more mature ecosystem. I use LumaFusion, which has been around since I believe 2016 now at this point, and it's going to be the most pro level video editing app that you can find on the iPad, and I've been using it for about 7 years. So most of the time, if there is an application that you use on macOS, you can probably, if you don't find the exact one over on iPadOS, there is some sort of different version or counterpart that somebody else has made in the App Store that you can find eventually. But again, there is still some limitation to iPadOS. Especially when it comes to power users and developers, Mac is going to be your only real option. If you need to use Xcode, if you need your full terminal access and that's how you interact with your computer, or if you're big into automation, then of course macOS is going to be the way to go because there's no terminal access, there's no Xcode counterpart on iPadOS. So those are things that, again, maybe eventually they'll come over, and yes, you can maybe virtual machine in and still kind of sort of get around it in a way with the iPad Pro, but natively and easily, you're not going to just be able to pull up a terminal window and do whatever you need to do. That's reserved for macOS. But then in that same light, you can't remove the display off your MacBook Pro, grab an Apple Pencil, start drawing on it, or use a touch-first interface because that's not what Macs do. That's an iPad-related versatility advantage, right? You're able to pull off your iPad, grab your Apple Pencil, write on it however you want to, annotate, note-take, draw, create, whatever the case may be, whether you are in the Notes application or you're in Good Things 3, or if you are using Affinity Photo or Procreate or Lightroom. All these applications are purpose-made for the iPad, for iPadOS, and for a touch-first interface, so it turns into a completely different product for you just by you removing it off the Magic Keyboard. And albeit the Magic Keyboard is expensive, but it's almost a must-have if you plan on using your iPad as a computer. And then when it comes to maybe some external monitor support and things of that nature, the iPad Pro does support extended monitor, but you can only do it to one external monitor. It can be any size and it scales very well. Like I put it on a 49-inch display and I put it on a 12-inch display, and it scales beautifully, and I don't know how it really handles that well, but it does handle it very well. Versus the MacBook Pro is a lot more traditional, and you can plug in 2 external monitors to the M4 MacBook Pro and be able to use them alongside your MacBook Pro. So again, it's a little bit more traditional, people are used to it, they know how that works. You can connect via the HDMI that's already in there, get a dongle, connect via USB-C port, or connect via Thunderbolt cable. So that's a lot more traditional in terms of being able to use some external monitors. But again, the iPad Pro can also have that external monitor, and it feels a lot more Mac-like now that you have those cool floating windows and the almost infinite dock and things like that. But again, they each have their pros and their cons in terms of what you're going to be using them for. So when it comes to some real-world workflow examples, if you're a student or you're in the education space, I would say that the iPad for the most part shines, unless you are a developer and you are knowing that you're going into coding and you need things like Xcode. I would recommend getting an iPad now at this point because it can handle a lot of applications that you need. I mean, most schools and education systems have an App Store application to manage everything, whether it is just a simple scheduling tool to pick your classes, to create appointments with your guidance counselor, whatever the case is. Most institutions use an application from the App Store, and your iPad will be able to run that, which is nice. So it's great for note-taking, for reading, for the Apple Pencil portion of it all. It now works with the windowing system. It works a lot more like a computer. So if you need it to be a computer, you can do that. Or if you need it to be a handwritten note-taking machine, it can also do that. When it comes to creative professionals, it kind of just depends on how you want to attack this, right? If you're somebody who's using the iPad for sketching, of course, gravitate towards the iPad. But if you're somebody who really needs that extra power and you need the fan that comes with the MacBook Pro, you might be able to get a little bit more from a sheer raw power standpoint. But again, LumaFusion, in my opinion, is just as good as Final Cut Pro. And then Affinity Photo is just as good as Photoshop. So it just depends on what your learning curve is, what you're used to using, and what you prefer to use overall. And then of course they both can do the everyday tasks. They both can run Slack, they both can be your email machine, they both can run YouTube and Netflix, and they both can just surf the web if you want to. They both can use Safari and Chrome and other applications like Brave Browser, and you can pretty much do a lot of the same thing in the Venn diagram when it comes to just the little things of everyday life, like running your personal house. So hopefully to this point you understand that from a power standpoint, they both have the same amount of power. It just now depends on what type of form factor you're going to be using the best or the most and what you're going to be needing to use that for. And then from a software standpoint, again, if you're going to be going to school to be a developer, then yes, go get a Mac computer, go get macOS, go get a MacBook Pro. But if you're in the creative space, the iPad could be a great option as well. And if you're just somebody who's like getting a business degree, where all you need to do is kind of run some Excel and some PowerPoint and maybe some pages and some numbers, you're in the Google Suite, they both can do the same thing at the end of the day. So once you have all that figured out and you've decided which one you want to get, The confusing part is now going to be the configs and the price options and which one is going to be best for you. As I mentioned, the M4 MacBook Pro from Amazon, the base level one, is $1299. I believe from Apple it's $1599, so that you do save $300, which is awesome. And that brings the M4 chip. It brings 16 gigs of RAM standard and 512 gigs of storage, and of course it has that internal fan. Versus on the iPad Pro side, right now is 10% off on Amazon. Normally it's $1299, but it's $1160 I believe right now on Amazon, brand new, and that brings 256 gigs of internal storage and only 8 gigs of RAM. If you want to go to the 16 gigs of RAM, you're going to outprice yourself, because before you even get into that, you got to budget in a $300 Magic Keyboard. Again, depending on when you get it on Amazon, it's anywhere from $275 to $350. And then of course the Apple Pencil, which could be $90 to $130 depending on when you get it. So the iPad Pro does get a little bit more expensive, but you're paying for the versatility and the fact that it's basically a 2-in-1 at this point. So if you really want to compare apples to apples and get to 16 gigs of RAM, you're going to be spending upwards of $2,200 on the iPad Pro versus still just $1,300 on the MacBook Pro. So that's really where the confusing part starts to come in. What do you want to end up doing? Do you want the versatility of a 2-in-1 on the iPad Pro? Do you view it as two different products that justify that price point? Or do you just want the simplicity of macOS? And my ultimate recommendation for most people, if you are price conscious and you can only choose one thing, is going to be the MacBook Pro. You get a lot more bang for your buck there. It's a little less confusing in terms of what you need. It's a little bit more familiar, but you know, if you can still only choose one and you're okay spending, you know, $1,500, $1,600 on an iPad Pro setup, I also think that you won't be disappointed in that purchasing decision. So ultimate recommendation, if you have to pick one, get the MacBook Pro. If you're willing to live a little dangerously, maybe the iPad Pro is something that you should try out. But let me know in the comment down below what you think. Hopefully this helped you guys decide or make a better educated decision on which one you guys are going to get, especially with back to school and all these deals that are happening right now. Definitely take advantage of those while you can, but that'll do it, everybody. If you made it to the end, leave a dolphin in the comments down below, and also leave a joke down below in comparing the iPad Pro and the MacBook Pro, and I'll pin the coolest one in the comments down below. But that'll do it, everybody. If you want to watch more videos like this one, like what's coming in September, click on one of these videos right here. Until next time, I'm Fernando. Peace, everyone.